Mr. Tinder by Nicholas Leonard. Mr. Tinder's red waistcoat was such a bright red that it made his mouth seem a kind of apricot orange. He had a big pair of lips, too. He was somewhere between 18 and 29 years old, so his cane was completely aesthetic, or so it seemed, for he cherished it so fondly that it may have provided him with some mystical powers. This cane was long, thin, and black, with a white cap on its end like a magician's wand. He wore a black top hat with the sides of his 1964 Beatles hairstyle creeping out from underneath. Had he not been in that red ringleader get-up, and had he wiped away his black eyeshadow, then he might have looked incredibly ordinary. But that was not his purpose. Some cultural revolutions and late-stage capitalism combined to make a precarious situation for new adults in post-pandemic America. The country was facing a kind of Japanese population problem. No, a kind of lazy panda problem. A third of men between 18 and 29 years old had never experienced a drop of romance in their lives. No dates, no first kiss, nothing. Now, that's no big deal. Everybody moves at their own pace, and not everybody desires romance in the first place. But a third of anything can be gargantuan in the right aspects. Now, Mr. Tinder wasn't always called Mr. Tinder, and Mr. Tinder didn't always wear a ringleader outfit with black eyeshadow and a top hat. And Mr. Tinder didn't always carry around that thin black cane. Originally, he was a psyop set loose to somehow fix the problem. But when he realized that he was setting out to rectify a problem that the government which set him loose created, he went rogue, kind of in the same way mercenary sailors became pirates when the British Empire didn't need them to disrupt French and Spanish ships anymore. It might have been this rogueness that gave him an air of mysticism, because it's a little fantastical when a man no longer wants to serve his employers, isn't it? This was Mr. Tinder, tapping the white tip of his cane on doors and twirling it behind his back while leaning a little forward in waiting. "Hello! Has your eldest been spending a lot of time in his room?" he'd ask when somebody opened up the door, only for them to close it in his face. His voice was not deep, but it certainly sounded to come from a strong Adam's apple. It was boyish, but sonorous. In Massachusetts, he frequented college campuses, making expressions only a surprised mime would make when he saw the occasional couple out for a walk near a pond at Endicott, or escorting each other to classes between the towering red brick buildings of Framingham. Often he was brushed off as a theatre kid of sorts. But there was no other city that Mr. Tinder liked better than Salem. The more eccentric tour guides in Salem usually wore black waistcoats and carried lanterns. But Mr. Tinder's waistcoat was red, and he didn't have a tour group. He was like a tour guide walking the town in search of a runaway tour group, marking him as somebody with no importance to the locals and tourists. Here he lived in splendor. The U.S. government and its sectors and infinite tentacles have a habit of leaving something in a desert and forgetting about it. Mr. Tinder was forgotten about shortly after he went rogue, but his bank account and debit cards were not shut down. His employers were so incompetent and negligent that they never thought twice to stop his payroll, and even when they noticed that cash was still being deposited into his account, they thought it was another fellow employer buying an express of Domino's pizza or renting another yacht. So there Mr. Tinder walked, one sunny day in May 2024, weaving through residential neighborhoods, up and down streets with historic houses on them, up and down pedestrian zones that ran between aisles of shops, down red brick roads, and sometimes appearing on that boulevard with the Dunkin' Donuts on the corner. If you're from Massachusetts, then you'd know the one. While seated on a bench by a row of e-scooters, he was examining passing couples and gauging how long their love would last. He saw the mistakes of lust for possessions in the boy's eyes and mistakes of vanity in the girl's eyes, and he just let them pass on, his top hat crooked just enough to obscure at least one of his disapproving eyes. Excuse me? He twisted on the bench, looking over his shoulder. It was an Indian family, a very worried mother, a very tiny daughter, and a very pleasant-looking father. "How much for a tour?" the mother asked. Mr. Tinder softened his sonorous voice. "Oh, I'm afraid I'm not offering tours today." The mother took her family away, and Mr. Tinder went back to keeping an eye out for the occasional couple. He stood his cane on the red brick ground before him and placed both hands atop the other end of the cane. How much it disappointed him to see people pass in unions of symbiotic relationships, not in unions of true love. That ladder was getting hard to find anyway. Mr. Tinder had two favorite spots in Salem, that boulevard with the Dunkin' on the corner and the street which had the witch house on it. Not that intersection, but the actual street that it was on. Next to the witch house was Salem's oldest church, which resembled a small castle more than a church, and next to that was Rope's mansion, which was better known as the Hocus Pocus house to most tourists, none of them knowing about how Mrs. Ropes burned to death in that very mansion almost 2 centuries before. The rest of this street was filled by colonial houses crammed abreast. This street was Essex Street. The boulevard was called Washington Street. Unlike other Dunkins, the Dunkins on Washington Street Boulevard did not have a pink and orange exterior, instead opting for a regal personality like the post office had across the street. These Dunkins had a light tan exterior with green shades above the entrance, and Dunkin' in big gold letters above it. After weaving through downtown Salem for a while, Mr. Tinder moseyed himself into this Dunkin' on Washington Street Boulevard, which the cars were rather congested on. Being air-conditioned, it was refreshing to enter, but that roasty aroma was such a rebellious thing in that cool place. He tipped the rim of his hat towards a mother and son sitting at the window and continued towards the counter. "What can I get you, sir?" said the male barista. His golf-style visor was pink and orange, despite the Dunkin's exterior, and he wore a black shirt tucked into khakis. He had a big head but small lips. His scruffy light brown hair was somewhat spiking out of the top of his visor. Mr. Tinder gauged him to be somewhere between 5'7" and 5'9", average. But sometimes average didn't cut it. What did cut it was the age range Mr. Tinder estimated him to be, which was somewhere between 18 and 29 years old. "Yes, have you ever kissed a girl?" Mr. Tinder asked. The male barista looked like he had just seen a shocking scene in a movie. I don't think we have that on the menu, sir." Mr. Tinder looked up at the menu on the rafter above the display of donuts. "Yes, you often don't." He dropped his eyes back down to the male barista. The male barista fidgeted before asking in a low voice, "Is this some kind of HR thing?" "It probably should be, shouldn't it?" "Look, guy, do you want a coffee or not?" "How old are you, young man?" The male barista was cringing now. 20? Any ambitions?" Making sure the customer is always satisfied." Mr. Tinder looked at the male barista's name tag. Manny. "Is Manny short for anything?" "Probably Manuel." Manny, the male barista answered, to which Mr. Tinder repeated unsurely, "Probably Manuel. Cocker spaniel, garbage disposal." Manny widened his eyes and pursed his lips. It wasn't uncommon for Dunkin's on Washington Street Boulevard to get weird or freaky characters, but this one was testing his patience. It was as though he was holding his breath. There was a mother and her kid in there, and he also didn't want to make a scene which would rouse his supervisor's attention. No, she was busy playing Candy Crush in the back and did not want to be interrupted. The only good thing about the situation was that it wasn't busy. Mr. Tinder raised his eyes as if configuring imaginary equations in the air. "Probably Emmanuel, 20, never kissed a woman." That one scene from We're the Millers came into Manny's mind, making him even more nervous. Mr. Tinder took an over-exaggerated deep breath. "Okay. Have you ever held hands with a girl? Mama doesn't count." No, sir." "Why not?" "I just never really was in a situation where that happened, or had to happen." "And that's perfectly okay. Did you attend any dances in high school?" "I went with friends." "And your friends?" "They never dated either," Manny said. "Do you know the House of Seven Gables, Manny?" Yeah." "You and I are going to go there and pick some flowers. Then we will go about Salem in search of a woman for you to bestow your harvest on." "What?" Manny squeaked. Mr. Tinder jumped up on the counter. Manny stepped back. The mother and her son looked up from their donuts. Nearly crouching, Mr. Tinder gestured his cane towards the door, as if the door was a pair of gates that led to some kind of romantic freedom. His eyes, in their black eyeliner, boomed like thunder. His maniacal come-with-me fashion was almost enticing, for what confidence did he have which permitted him to leap up onto the counter? It inspired Manny, though he maintained an awkward nervousness to him. Mr. Tinder shot his cane through his fingers, catching it at the tail end, and reached over Manny with it, poking its white end into the hole of a glazed donut, and retrieved it that way. He caught it and took it. Manny looked into the back room from where he stood. "Heidi?" "Yeah, Manny," his supervisor called. "I have to go." "Go? Go where?" Mr. Tinder hopped off the counter, walking backwards to the door while chewing. Out!" Manny shouted before climbing over the counter, dismantling it, and following Mr. Tinder outside onto Washington Street Boulevard. They started heading east, crossing the crosswalks on Washington Street Boulevard, where one impatient driver honked at them. Manny was in his grasp. The theatrics weren't as necessary now. Mr. Tinder could let the town of Salem do its work and charm him, for Derby Street did have some charming houses, the kind that reminded you were in Massachusetts. After pulling a Mission Impossible heist in the gardens outside the House of Seven Gables, the two were on Essex Street, with Manny standing out in the open with a singular purple flower drooping in his hand, while Mr. Tinder watched from a bench. He watched lady after lady pass, Manny too hesitant to speak to any of them for whatever reason. There happened to be an old lady seated on the bench beside him. Sliding his finger up his cheek, he spoke to her. "You know what's wrong with young men nowadays?" She turned her head, silver perm and storytime eyes behind glasses. "They don't know what to do with flowers," Mr. Tinder mused. "A young gentleman held the door open for me this morning, and I thought that was very thoughtful," said the old lady. But Mr. Tinder wasn't pleased. He sounded exhausted. "It just picked to die." He looked away from Manny after a group of women with shopping bags passed him by. He did swivel slowly as if about to offer one of them the purple flower, but he didn't. Now Mr. Tinder had his attention on the old lady. "Pray tell," he began, "did you have any high school sweethearts back in your day?" She brightened. "I still do. My husband, he's in the restroom right now. He has a very small bladder. Oh, and it's been shrinking over the years." "What was he like when you were young?" "I had my first picnic with him. Oh, he was very kind. He never tried anything on me. He was a gentleman." He looked back at Manny and asked aloud, "What changed?" What do you mean, darling?" "They just don't know what to do with a flower," he moped, still having his black border eyes cast out on Manny. Another girl passed. Manny was evidently prepared to give away the flower, for there was the slightest twitch of his arm going forward, but he chickened out. Now there's one less flower for a woman to smell." Mr. Tinder sighed, his sonorous voice making it sound a bit too pretend. "What do you mean, darling?" "The young people today will know when they're your age, ma'am. Luckily, you'll never have to know, Mr. Tinder explained, watching Manny chicken out yet again. It being so much easier to hand a stranger a styrofoam cup of coffee than a little skinny flower with a heavy purple head. Though he meant to keep an eye on women or groups of women who seemed single, a couple caught his eye. The man was tall and pale, a ginger with long, veiny arms and long legs jetting out of his shorts. The woman was short, maybe 5'2", tan, a little chubby and blonde. She had a blue crop top on that showed off her belly and lower back, the cushion of her body between grey sweatpants and the blue crop top. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail and she had a purse on her arm, and she had a full bust. But what Mr. Tinder noticed about the woman was the faint purple bruises on the back of one of her arms, and another bruise which her crop top nearly covered. "Excuse me, ma'am, how would you say that couple is over there?" he asked and pointed. The old lady squinted. "Oh, I'd say about 27, 26. "You think so?" My eyesight is not so good anymore," the old lady chuckled. The couple passed Manny, who still held the drooping purple flower. Mr. Tinder couldn't help but eye the bruise on the back of the blonde woman's arm. He had a suspicion, but he was unsure, because the woman exuded a kind of peace while walking with the tall redhead. But that suspicion of his just would not accept it. There was that tall ginger, perhaps one of the 2/3 of men, 18 to 29, shepherding off a woman who had a bruise on her arm and back. He couldn't sit there and wonder, so he sprang up without saying goodbye to the old lady and started trailing the couple down Essex Street. He made sure to keep a careful distance, blending in with crowds and stepping in and out of shops when he had to, and quickening his pace when necessary, and slowing and stopping when necessary too. He saw the enunciation of her bottom in the sweatpants, and the way that the tall redhead walked with a star baseball player bravado, as if he owned the world. Then the correct word came upon Mr. Tinder. This tall redhead walked with the belief that he was untouchable. Untouchable, always right, always deserving, while poor Manny, the male barista, was still untouched. If his suspicion was right, no, how could he come to that conclusion with how attached the woman seemed to him? The groove of her pace seemed dedicated to the tall man beside her. Everything about her did, even the lackadaisical swing of her ponytail, pendulum style. She was in love with him, but that easygoing triumph that Mr. Tinder had seen on the redhead's face was not an expression formed from love. If Mr. Tinder's suspicions were correct, then this tall redhead only loved one person: himself. Then what of the girl? Bruises. One thing angered Mr. Tinder more than the American government's negligence, and that was men who did not deserve the love of a woman, but had it, and did not appreciate it. Men who abused, cheated, and treated those who loved them like toys. And Mr. Tinder knew that no matter statistics, no matter what public opinion was, this villainous man often had an easier time finding girls than others, and for whatever reason, sometimes women stayed with his man. He wanted to be wrong, but he just had to trail them for that reason. He ended up following them to a house on a residential street which they entered together. He maneuvered his way onto the lawn, carefully keeping an eye on the windows of the house. From behind some hedges, he witnessed the scene inside the house's living room, which looked warm, with an orange light within, recliners, and a fireplace. The chubby girl was sitting down and already crying, while the tall redhead was doing something in a kitchen beyond the living room, just barely visible to Mr. Tinder. He saw her mouth move to form the words, some two-syllable name. "Jason?" Mr. Tinder whispered to himself. He watched further on, only for nothing to happen, but his suspicion left him there. He didn't want to be right, but he just had a feeling. He needed proof, though. He had climbed up into a tree to look in the bathroom window on the second story of the house to see the woman crying in the mirror, taking off her makeup, but then the tall redhead came in with one lustful sweep and curled his arms around her belly. At first, the embrace seemed endearing, but then he pulled her hair and made a fist against her belly. No, he was literally clenching the skin on her belly, gripping it like it was rubber. Even from there, Mr. Tinder could see her skin make a desperate elastic move to obey his nail. Mr. Tinder grimaced and watched. Mr. Tinder swept himself into the Dunkin' of Washington Street Boulevard the next day with movements that hinted he was a marionette under control of jazz hands. He seemed in complete control of balance, though enjoyed hinting otherwise to the few patrons seated by the windows. "Probably Emmanuel," he cheered, but immediately the male barista seemed appalled. Manny waited to hiss until Mr. Tinder was close enough. "I almost got fired yesterday." "Then you'll probably get fired today," Mr. Tinder said, pointing his cane at him, then turning around to appreciate the view of Washington Street Boulevard. "It is a beautiful view. So sad, all of it is used up by cars." "What do you want?" Mr. Tinder snapped back around. "I need your help." "My help?" Mr. Tinder flicked his cane forward and used it to lift one of Manny's arms, which was rather twiggy, with the slightest root of a bicep lazily on his humerus. That will have to do," Mr. Tinder mused, releasing Manny's arms. "Do for what? Anyway, I gave that flower away." "Oh, who?" "A nice old lady sitting on a bench." "Manny, Manny, Manny," Mr. Tinder said. "I have another mission for you." "No, forget about it. You can leave now." Mr. Tinder watched Manny, pointing at the door, but there was such a serious look in his eyes that it enunciated the black eyeliner, and Mr. Tinder was suddenly a man who would be listened to. Manny put his finger down. "Would you ever hit a woman, Manny?" "What? No." "What do you think of men who do?" I think they're dirtbags. And what should be done with dirtbags, Manny? Manny mulled this over. They go to jail? No, not always. What are you getting at? Before we know what to do with flowers, we have to know what to do with dirt, Mr. Tinder philosophized. Minutes later, the two of them were walking down Derby Street en route to the more residential areas of downtown Salem. No! Manny snapped after Mr. Tinder explained what he wanted him to do. Oh my God! Manny turned around. I gotta go back! Mr. Tinder whipped his cane behind him and caught the hem of Manny's pants with the white tip, pulling them down to reveal a pair of whitey tighties. Manny quickly pulled his pants back up, though nearly falling in the process. He shimmied back around. Now, if the ladies saw that, then they would snatch the flower right out of your hands, Mr. Tinder said. Spotless skivvies often make a lover giddy. Manny's face scrunched up into one smooshed pie cringe. He shook his head. I don't care. I'm going back. And he started walking away, but Mr. Tinder hurried back and stood in front of him. Don't you see what this is, Manny? A goddamn crazy idea, yes. Get out of my way. But Mr. Tinder was not getting out of Manny's way. In fact, he was proving rather talented at walking backwards down the sidewalk. This is about two things, Mr. Tinder was explaining, his sonorous voice oddly giving into some power of a higher pitch, maybe excitement. Confidence and saving someone. If you can't be brave enough to talk to a girl, then be brave enough to keep them from the cowards of your gender. That's not what this is about. I can talk to girls. I'm sure you can, but Manny, I want you to do this. At least, prove to me young men have something in them. Mr. Tinder seemed to be losing his own confidence. Actually, he seemed on the verge of pleading for something. Prove to me that young men like you have something good in them. Manny stopped walking, and Mr. Tinder stopped walking backwards. This is not a battle for the damsel in distress, but a battle to free your demographic. I don't know what you mean. And Manny went to walk away from Mr. Tinder, but then Mr. Tinder's sonorous voice returned, asking, What if it was your mother? What if it was your sister? I don't have a sister. A little cousin, even someone you work with. It doesn't matter who, Manny. Nobody deserves this, and men like Jason don't deserve to continue leeching off a woman's heart and body. This isn't even about being Jason? Yes, that's his name, I think. Manny stopped and considered. It was sunny out, and he was already feeling himself receiving the beginning of a sunburn. What did he look like? Very tall. Tall? You think I could fight a tall guy? It's not a matter of can or can't. It's will or want you, Mr. Tinder explained, then pressing the white tip of his cane against Manny's chest. It's a matter of heart. What kind of heart do you want to have? It could have been because Manny was fed up with how meek he was. It could have been because of the almost musical pleading in parts of Mr. Tinder's persuasive speaking. It could have been some heroic fantasy. It could have been all of those and none of those. But moments later, while the sun was still hot, Manny was walking up the front lawn towards the house. He picked up a garden gnome and threw it through the living room window. Mr. Tinder, noticing some similarity between how Manny's biceps twitched and how the window shuttered. He watched Manny step into the living room while a woman screamed. Inside, Manny went upstairs and found Jason, the tall redhead, playing video games in some upstairs living room. The woman had been reading in the bedroom. Jason took off his headset and turned around, only to catch Manny's bony knuckles in his face. The chaos of the video game was still going on screen, and Jason was more so recovering from surprise than the hit, and Manny took this opportunity to punch Jason again. What an immediate ache that was in his knuckles. He did it again. Jason went to stand up, but Manny took the controller and bashed it on Jason's head. "Oh!" Jason cried. Manny swung down again. How quick that violent curiosity was. He wanted to know what it would be like to smash the controller against his mouth, so that's what he did. Teeth made discoordinated departures from his gums. Blood spurted from his lips. "I'm calling 911! I'm calling 911!" the woman screamed, running down the hallway, but Manny didn't care. He liked the pain in his hand, so he punched Jason in the face again. Maybe Manny seemed taller while looming over Jason, or maybe his entrance was so brash that he seemed to be some kind of specially trained hitman. All kinds of thoughts went through Jason's head while he cried about his teeth and aching head. But Manny was just an ordinary man. "Hello? Yes? There is a man in my house and he's assaulting my boyfriend. Oh, please, come quick! Hurry!" Manny walked out of the room, down the hall and down the stairs, and out through the broken window coolly. He and Mr. Tinder were gone before the police arrived and cast their red and blue lights up and down the normally peaceful street. Mr. Tinder harbored a sadistic satisfaction as they walked back towards the House of Seven Gables, where they passed through its gardens and examined all the white and purple flowers. Manny was quiet and sweaty, cleverly keeping his hands in his pockets, and neither one was saying anything. The unfortunate thing was that the woman wanted to stay with Jason despite his abuse, but Mr. Tinder saw to it that Jason was found with a block of heroin the next month. You can afford a lot on a government payroll, especially when they forget about you, and you can do a lot of vigilante good, especially when the world's neglected you for so long that not only they forget you're there, but they forget what you're capable of and are incredulous of your capabilities.